There's a building in China where you could be born in the hospital and go to school and get your first job and order dinner and grow old without ever once stepping outside, because everything you need for an entire human life is stacked inside one single tower. More than 20,000 people live in it right now, more than plenty of entire American towns hold. Rent starts at around $210 a month, which sounds like a steal until you find out what that money actually buys. A windowless room lit by artificial light around the clock, in a building where some residents go days at a time without feeling direct sunlight on their skin. Here's what makes this story better than the raw numbers, though. This tower was never supposed to be an apartment building at all. It was designed by the same architect behind one of the most famous luxury hotels on the planet, and the plan collapsed so spectacularly that 20,000 strangers ended up living inside the wreckage of a five-star dream. What happened once they all moved in is stranger than anything a screenwriter would dare invent. And stick around, because you'll also see the building China tried to make even bigger than this one. A tower meant to be the tallest structure on Earth that today exists as nothing but abandoned pits used by local villagers as fish ponds. The building is called Regent International, and it stands in the heart of Hangzhou, a booming tech city about an hour outside Shanghai, curving through the skyline in a giant S shape like a ribbon of glass and concrete, dropped in from 50 years in the future. The numbers only get more absurd the closer you look. It rises 206 meters into the sky, roughly the height of a 60-story skyscraper, though officially it counts as 36 to 39 floors depending on which side you're standing on, and even that floor count being negotiable tells you something about this place. Total floor area adds up to nearly 1.5 million square meters, bigger than 200 football fields folded into a single structure, and somewhere in all that space live more than 20,000 people, with capacity built for up to 30,000. A building holding 30,000 people isn't really a building anymore. It's a town that happens to share a front door connected by hallways and elevators instead of streets and sidewalks. And unlike a normal apartment building, where living there means constantly leaving, Regent International was designed so you almost never have to. Inside are full shopping centers, restaurants, food courts, grocery stores, hair salons, gyms, indoor swimming pools, even hospitals and schools, with different sections linked by skywalks and bridges so residents can cross the entire complex without going outdoors, without weather, without traffic, and if they choose, without ever seeing the sky. Just running a place like this is its own quiet miracle, because a building with 20,000 residents generates the daily logistics of a small city, thousands of food deliveries arriving every day, mountains of trash that has to disappear somehow, elevators functioning more like a transit system than a convenience, and constant turnover as leases change hands. Every problem a town has, this building has too, just compressed into one address. And that compression is the whole story, both everything that makes it work and everything that goes wrong inside it. It sounds like science fiction, but here's the twist that makes it better. Nobody ever sat down and designed a city inside a building. This entire thing exists because a different plan fell apart. Regent International started life on paper as a luxury 6-star hotel, meant to rival the world's most exclusive resorts, and the pedigree was real. The project was designed by Alicia Liao, the same architect who worked as chief designer on Marina Bay Sands in Singapore, the hotel with the ship-shaped rooftop that became one of the most recognizable buildings on the planet. Somewhere along the way, that luxury hotel plan collapsed. Instead of hosting wealthy travelers for a few nights at a time, the building got carved into thousands of small residential units and opened its doors in 2013 to anyone who could cover rent. That single decision changed everything about what this place would become, because the rent turned out to be shockingly low for a city like Hangzhou. A small windowless studio goes for as little as $210 a month. Even a larger unit with a balcony and real daylight runs around $560 in a city where housing costs have climbed steadily for years. That price acted like a magnet, pulling in young people fresh out of school chasing their first tech job, small online business owners running shops out of their apartments, and a growing wave of social media influencers and live streamers who realized the building's endless glowing hallways made the perfect content backdrop. So many creators moved in that locals started calling it the internet. Celebrity building. A tower where thousands of people film and stream their lives from inside the same set of walls, and where your neighbor is as likely to be performing for a phone camera at midnight as sleeping. Daily life inside runs almost entirely on convenience and technology, to the point where cash is basically extinct. Even a bottle of water from a vending machine gets paid for through facial recognition tied to a mobile app, so most residents don't bother carrying a wallet at all. Picture an ordinary weekday here. You wake up, take an elevator down a few floors instead of commuting, grab breakfast at an internal food court, drop your dog at pet daycare a few doors down, squeeze in a gym session at lunch, and pick up groceries on the ride back up, all without your feet ever touching pavement. Need: a haircut, a dentist, or a late-night snack at 2 a.m.? It's all somewhere inside the same walls, usually just an elevator ride away. For plenty of residents, that convenience is the whole appeal. Every wasted minute, a normal city forces on you. The commute, the traffic, the weather, stripped out like fat trimmed off a steak. But for others, something darker creeps in over time, because a building that gives you everything also quietly removes every reason to leave. Residents describe a strange sliding feeling where days blur together, where you realize you haven't been outside in a week and can't pinpoint when that became normal, where the same hallways and artificial light and recycled air start to press in on you. Teehee windowless units are the extreme version of this. Rooms where morning and midnight look identical, where your body's sense of time runs entirely on a phone screen, and where the low rent slowly reveals its true cost, which was never really money. That strange, sealed-off completeness is exactly what made the building blow up online, with walkthrough videos pulling hundreds of thousands of views from people reacting with the same disbelief. An apartment building where 20,000 people live. The influencer population turned the tower into its own little content economy, with creators filming hallway tours. For followers who treat the building like a tourist attraction, live streamers broadcasting from windowless studios dressed up to look glamorous on camera, and delivery drivers feeding people who haven't left their floor in days since the audience watching never sees the difference. Some residents openly admit they picked the building because it's cheap and famous at the same time, which might make it the only apartment complex on Earth where the address itself is part of the business model. But fame cuts both ways, and the same things that made Regent International go viral also made it a magnet for exactly the kind of trouble you'd expect from packing tens of thousands of strangers and hundreds of unregulated businesses into one tower, with almost nobody watching closely. By the early 2020s, the building had picked up a local reputation for being too open, too chaotic, too hard to police, legitimate shops and studios operating wall-to-wall with far shadier businesses, subletting spiraling out of control, safety complaints piling up without ever quite getting resolved. Then, in 2021, as Hangzhou prepared to host the Asian Games and wanted to clean up the city's image, local authorities formed a task force targeting problem buildings across the district, and Regent International landed near the top of the list almost immediately. The crackdown led to several arrests connected to prostitution operating inside the building, along with fines for landlords and sublessors involved. Once that went public, the building's reputation flipped almost overnight, from quirky internet-famous tower to the subject of scandal headlines and salacious rumors that still follow it today. Underneath the scandal sits a bigger question that has nothing to do with crime, because packing 20,000 to 30,000 people into a single tower creates a fire safety challenge unlike almost any other residential building on Earth. Evacuating that many people from one high-rise quickly in an emergency is a nightmare scenario. Chinese safety regulators have studied specifically because of buildings like this one, especially after high-rise fires elsewhere in the country forced nationwide reviews of fire, standards in dense towers. Nothing about the building is considered unsafe today. It remains fully occupied and fully operational, but the uncomfortable question never really goes away. At what point does convenience stop being worth the risk of stacking this many lives on top of each other? There's a quieter cost too, one that never shows up in any inspection report. Isolation, shrinking exposure to sunlight and green space, the constant background noise of thousands of neighbors, long elevator waits, and that creeping shut-in feeling residents describe when an entire world fits inside four walls. Urban planners have argued about this building for years, some calling it a preview of how overcrowded cities will have to build in the future, others calling it a warning about what happens when density gets pushed right up to the edge of what people can psychologically handle. And here's the part that might surprise you most. As extreme as all this sounds, Regent International isn't even China's biggest experiment in cramming people into housing. There's another one outside Beijing holding up to 35 times more people, built on the exact opposite philosophy. And comparing the two changes how you see this whole story. North of Beijing sits a district called Tiantongyuan, and the scale is hard to grasp even after everything you've just heard. Somewhere between 400,000 and 700,000 people live there, depending on which count you trust, making it the largest residential community in all of Asia, an ocean of nearly identical apartment blocks stretching toward the horizon. Construction began in 1999, thrown up at incredible speed to provide cheap housing after China's old state housing system collapsed, growing so fast that surrounding infrastructure never caught up, earning it the blunt nickname locals still use today, the Sleeper City. The name is brutally accurate because where Regent International crams every possible amenity inside one. Our Tiantongyuan was built as almost pure housing, with barely any jobs, shopping, or entertainment mixed in. Its hundreds of thousands of residents sleep there and commute elsewhere for everything, often more than an hour each way. The morning rush became famous across China, with lines outside the subway station stretching so long people queue for ages just to enter the station before the train ride even begins, every single working day. Residents describe a life split cleanly in two: a daytime version happening somewhere in central Beijing, where the jobs and restaurants and friends are, and a nighttime version happening in Tiantongyuan, which for many amounts to sleeping, waking up, and getting back in line. The Ichi district has spent decades trying to fix the imbalance, adding schools, shops, and transit, and planners are still untangling problems baked in from the very first block, because a community built at that speed for that many people never really gets a second chance at its foundations. Put the two side by side, and you're looking at opposite ends of the same experiment. Regent International solved density by going up and including everything, one vertical town under a single roof. Tiantongyuan solved density by spreading out and including almost nothing, a horizontal sea of bedrooms with no town attached. Both were answers to the same impossible question. Where do you put millions of new city residents when there isn't enough room? And both show, in opposite directions, how far China has been willing to stretch the basic idea of what home even means. But at least both of them exist. The last stop on this list is the one that didn't make it, the most ambitious residential project China ever attempted. And the way it died might be the strangest part of this entire story. A bit of context first, because China building at absurd scale isn't a one-off habit. A few years before Regent International opened, the city of Chengdu unveiled the New Century Global Center, a single building with around 1.7 million square meters of floor space, which at the time made it the largest building on Earth by floor area, bigger than Dubai's airport, complete with shopping malls, offices, hotels, an ice rink, a movie theater, and an indoor artificial beach with a wave pool and a giant screen playing an ocean sunset that never actually sets. Building at incomprehensible scale isn't one architect's quirk in China. It's closer to a national instinct. Which brings us to 2013, when a company called Broad Sustainable Building announced the most ambitious version of that instinct anyone had ever attempted. This was a company already famous for construction speed that seemed physically impossible. They'd assembled a 30-story hotel in about 2 weeks using prefabricated modules. In time-lapse, footage that went viral worldwide and left engineers everywhere asking whether that was even allowed. Their method involved building almost everything in a factory first, entire finished sections with wiring and plumbing already installed, then stacking them on site like enormous toy blocks. It worked so well on smaller projects that the company's founder decided to aim at the biggest target imaginable. A tower in Changsha called Sky City, 220 stories tall, reaching 838 meters, which would have surpassed the Burj Khalifa and made it the tallest building on Earth, assembled from factory-built steel modules in roughly 90 days. And it wasn't going to be an office tower. It was Regent International's concept taken to its absolute limit. A fully self-contained city in the sky with apartments for around 4,500 families, plus schools, a hospital, offices, hotel rooms, and even vertical farms growing food inside the building. An entire society stacked into one structure taller than anything human-s had ever built. It never happened. Within about a week of the groundbreaking ceremony, regulators pulled the plug after discovering the developer hadn't secured full safety and environmental approvals, and the project froze before it ever rose above the dirt. The foundation pits sat abandoned for years, slowly filling with water, until local villagers reportedly started using them as fish ponds. That's what remains of the tallest building on Earth today. Fish swimming in the footprint of a tower that was supposed to hold 4,500 families in the clouds. Even in a country willing to build almost anything, ambition alone doesn't get a building out of the ground. Step back and look at what these three places actually are, because together they tell one story. Regent International is the experiment that mostly worked. A vertical town where 20,000 people live stacked inside a single tower, famous and infamous at the same time, proof that a building really can swallow an entire life. Tiantongyuan is the experiment that worked too well. A horizontal ocean of housing that grew into Asia's largest community while forgetting to include everything that makes a community livable. And Sky City is the experiment that flew too close to the sun, the tallest building on Earth, reduced to fish ponds before a single floor was ever built. All three came from the same pressure. Hundreds of millions of people flooding into Chinese cities faster than any country has urbanized in human history, and a government and construction industry willing to try almost anything to house them. Whether you see Regent International as a preview of how the world's crowded cities will eventually have to build, or as a warning about what gets lost when they do, it stands today as living proof of how far you can push the idea of a building before it stops being a building at all and becomes something closer to a city that just happens to have a front door. Would you actually live in a place like Regent International, or does sharing one roof with 20,000 neighbors sound like a personal nightmare? Honestly, after everything I read putting this together, I still can't decide.